Passengers just disembarked a ship in Spain after Hantavirus exposures. And we're recording this episode the next day because this new situation shoves an uncomfortable question into our minds. Are we still vulnerable to the same failures that may have cost millions of lives? Stick around and you'll hear Jim say this.
I want accountability without scapegoating. And I want prosecution without bloodlust.
Instead of conflict and aggression, here's governance built on grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Hantavirus is big in the news right now. We sit down to record just one day or so after people with cases and exposure are deboarding a cruise ship. And today is the day where the statute of limitations is expiring on Anthony Fauci, lying to Congress about gain-of-function research. Indeed, today, we focus on one of his lieutenants who was indicted for having, quote, deliberately concealed information and falsified records in an effort to suppress alternative theories regarding the origins of COVID-19, end quote. And I'm using the entire word there in spite of the dings we get for it. Today, we'll be discussing that indictment, the prosecution of David Morens, Senior Scientific Advisor to the NIAID Director. You can say NIAID if you like. Morens' boss was none other than Anthony Fauci. But you come to Gracearchy with Jim Babka not to get the news. You can get the news in many places. You come here to get a unique and grace-based take. Sponsored by the Zero Aggression Project here, zeroaggressionproject.org. And by the way, please subscribe if you're new to this. And if you're tuned in, click like and thumbs up. Become part of the tribe, people. We want you. So, Jim, are you worried at all about Hantavirus?
I'm not, actually, because unlike COVID, it is probably zoonotic spillover of some kind, and it seems isolated.
Zoonotic spillover?
Zoonotic spillover, meaning that it came actually from animals instead of in a lab.
I know. We called our previous episode the Spillover Gang, so I just wanted to make sure I got zoonotic into the lexicon here. Okay, yes. People, those are your $25 words for the day. Everything else will be one syllable, right?
Yeah, and I think that most of the people that may have been exposed or have had it have, for the most part, been isolated in extraordinary ways and are continuing to be isolated. That's not true across the board. The first man that died, his wife went home to South Africa, and she did get sick. So there is a little bit of reason, a tiny reason to be concerned, but I am not. And I am not one of these people that's looking forward to another round of this. I almost think that there's people who enjoy the drama and they kind of would like it to come back. And gee, wasn't it great that we could see who wore their masks correctly and so forth. I'm
You don't want to go back to those days?
I definitely don't want to go back. And I think that's part of what we need to cover here today. I think we need to understand what happened last time. So there is an important historical lesson in it.
We've been at this since 2023. I think that's when our spillover
2022. We started in 2022. Yes, we're coming up right now as we're recording the show. We're very, very close to our anniversary, our 4-year anniversary.
4-year anniversary.
So we've done 4 seasons of this.
C+ just landed in the middle of us doing what we were doing. No. It landed earlier, and we
landed earlier. We were dealing with it, but yes, but we were still living with it,
and we're still living with it. I know people with long COVID. We have a team member with long COVID. So, what is the Spillover Gang? Let's just reset for a second. And why did you decide to call it that? I love this term, by the way. People.
Yeah, so we did that in March. So we were doing a little date exercise here a second, kind of thinking out loud. But, it's good that you've lost track of the time on some of this stuff because it means you're recovering. You're not like hung up on this stuff and living in trauma. That's good. But in March of 2023, we did an episode titled COVID and the Spillover Gang. We'll leave it in the show notes because I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what was said in that show. I will just say we've learned more since then. And if there was any doubt about the fact that this came out of a lab, it's gone 3 years and 2 months later. It's just gone.
So we can say with certainty that the reason that the world got COVID was because of a leak in a lab in Wuhan, China.
Correct. I will say 99.44% sure. How's that? Like Ivory soap, it's that pure.
Yep.
Okay. There is the ever possibility, and there are still people maintaining this, that it is a zoonotic spillover. And we called them the Spillover Gang because they were designed the way a conspiracy theory is designed. A small minority of people believed this adamantly. And if you looked, you found the same fingerprints of the same people again and again. Now, in the previous episode, I was at pains to try to keep the definition of who was in that circle contained because Christian Anderson, Edward Eddie Holmes, and Robert Bob Gary. So Christian Anderson, Eddie Holmes, Bob Gary are the core members of the Spillover Gang. And Mike Warraby had become kind of a bonus member of the Spillover Gang, along with Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins. These were all people that we knew had participated in leading ways in trying to put out a paper and a study, a letter really, and a study that would basically say there was no such thing. And the government coordinated with social media to make it impossible, including on the YouTube platform, for you to say out loud that this came out of a lab. And that was not the majority opinion of science, right? It wasn't the consensus. It wasn't even close. It was these handful of people. If anybody believed any bit of that, it was based on these people. And I named these people because you could go back to Anderson, Holmes, and Gary. Every single story that you saw up through that time in 2023, and by the way, it's continued pretty much to be true to this day. Every story that you've seen has quoted these guys or somebody who directly works in partnership with them. They are the person behind that person. So in that episode that we did, we talked about Florence DeBar, and she's tied in with those guys. In fact, one of the first people she called was Eddie. So it's, if you understood that this was an engineered thing and that there were other people in the scientific community raising questions, and everybody that started doing this that didn't have a stake in the NIAID, the NIAID money, was really suspicious. The deeper they looked, the more suspicious they got. Today, we are in a position where we have government agencies all over the planet, and several of them here in our own government, who have basically said, and this has happened gradually over time. This didn't happen right away. It wasn't true necessarily even at the time that we were recording. We would be able to begin talking about the FBI questioning it, right? But we've had a number of different agencies come out because a lot of people wait for the government to tell them something's official. Well, we've had the official statements that have come out that have questioned this, and they've happened in governments all across the planet. And it's an open secret. Everybody understands this now. What was derided in 2021 and starting to become obviously true in 2023 is now overwhelmingly true in 2026.
So there's an aspect of this that we want to be fair about. And to steelman a gentleman who needs a lot of that right now, and I'm using the term loosely, but back in the day, we said we'd call balls and strikes on Donald Trump. And I think we've got a pretty good reason to steelman him for what's happened in the news recently with Morens, correct?
Yeah, so I think there's two things to discuss here. One of them will be our main topic today, but before I get to that, I just want to say that another official agency that has come out and taken a position on this is the White House itself. They issued a special web page. And in my Spillover Gang thing, I got a little more speculative at the time. I was openly a little bit more speculative, and maybe not, some of my speculations are not true. Even to this hour, it's possible that some of the things I thought, for example, the original source of the virus itself, I don't know for 100% sure that I'm right about that, okay? But I posited a complete theory for how that would work. What is interesting is that there is a bare minimum case that the White House has posted. They have a website that they have dedicated to this, and they did this corresponding with the prosecution, which we'll get to in just a second. They made 5 points, and I want to read them aloud because they are just like kind of a bare minimum. But if these bare minimum things are true, it comes from a lab. First, the virus possesses a biological characteristic that is not found in nature. 2, Data shows that all COVID-19 cases stem from a single introduction into humans. This runs contrary to previous pandemics where there were multiple spillover events. So the virus doesn't always succeed. It's kind of a try again type of thing.
Sure, that's
right?
how viruses work.
Yes. So we don't have multiple examples. Wuhan is home, this is number 3, to China's foremost SARS research lab, which has a history of conducting gain-of-function research, which is gene altering and organism supercharging. And they did that at inadequate biosafety levels. 4, the Wuhan Institute of Virology researchers were sick with COVID-like symptoms in the fall of 2019, months before COVID-19 was discovered at the wet market. If you go back to that episode, COVID and the Spillover Gang, that we did back in March of 2023, we actually detail the exact timeline. We know a lot about what the timeline was all the way back then. The information that's come out since has not invalidated that. And number 5, by nearly all measures of science, if there was evidence of a natural origin, it would have already surfaced, but it hasn't. So
there's been no evidence of that.
Right, and they've been looking for it. The Spillover Gang definitely wants that evidence to be made clear. And Mike Warraby, who kind of came in under Eddie's wing, has done a fantastic job. We talked about it in the episode in March of 2023. Of trying to make that case. He made it visually and with maps and graphs and a whole host of things that were designed to kind of put the cookies on the lowest shelf. They have tried. They have hopped from animal to animal to animal. They have not been able to deliver the results to us, and they would have by now. Okay, so that's part 1. But the part we're going to focus on the most here today is on the prosecution of David Morens.
Right. And in the whole RFK Jr. thing and the whole stuff about vaccines in general and all the other craziness that's going on right now, is this some sort of an attack against science? I read it and I'm like, okay, so what is the administration now going after people finally?
No, and I really wanted to take a lot of time coming up here to do that. But let's just, before we do that, can we lay out some facts for everybody?
Yes, too, because it'll help,
All right, so David Morens is 78 years old. He's a virologist and epidemiologist. He was the senior advisor to Fauci from 2006 to 2022. He worked at the U.S. Institutes of Health, Allergy and Infectious Disease Institute, which Fauci directed for almost 4 decades. Here are the allegations. He's been indicted, and here are the allegations. He used private email accounts for government business and deleted records. And another allegation, coordinated with co-conspirators to hide communications related to the genesis of the COVID-19 virus and high-risk coronavirus research that the NIH was funding. Co-conspirators include an unnamed scientist, but a lot of people think it's Gerald Kush. There's a lot of evidence inside there. I wasn't familiar with Gerald before this, and there's very little internet footprint on him, at least if you try to Google. But he's the former associate director of Boston University's infectious disease lab. He's one of 2 unnamed in the indictment co-conspirators. The other seems to be very clearly Peter Daszak. He's with EcoHealth Alliance. Now, he came up heavily in the previous episode. He is the conduit by which money goes to Wuhan. It goes through the federal government, through EcoHealth Alliance, and then out to the Wuhan lab.
So is EcoHealth Alliance like an NGO, or are they a government agency doing something?
No, they're not a government agency. They would be, I guess, under that definition, an NGO. They're a conduit. They get a contract, they submit a grant, get a contract, and then they decide who to allocate it to. And they're involved in getting funding to the Wuhan lab. Peter Daszak, we covered in the previous episode that we did in 2023, was also one of the people who investigated himself. So the World Health Organization looked to see if this was a lab leak and came to the conclusion very quickly and early on that it wasn't. They had a panel of international experts that were involved in this. The American representative to that panel was none other than Peter Daszak. So back to David Morens. If found guilty on all charges, he faces up to 51 years in federal prison. At 78, that would mean that's where he'd spend the rest of his life. Let me just cover real quickly. I'm going to race through this. I want you to understand kind of how all this hangs together.
Yeah.
May 2020, Morens and the two conspirators are accused of engaging in a fraud. The purpose is to restore Dashik's research grant, which has been stopped. It's been held back. EcoHealth Alliance had awarded to the Wuhan Institute in China. There, they were researching coronaviruses in bats and their potential to jump into humans. The previous month, the agency had suddenly terminated the grant, and the project was ended after it caught negative political attention.
Now, this is March of 2020?
This is March to May, that time frame right there, all this is going down.
The worldwide outbreak is beginning at that point. In this same time frame, are they trying to hide
right away?
Yeah.
Right away. And we got into some of the other stuff that they were doing in January and February in that episode, COVID and the Spillover Gang.
Okay, I'm with you.
But we're focused mostly here on Morens and Dashik's relationship. There were a group of scientists, 80 of them, who signed a letter, and Francis Collins, who was the NIH director, warned that canceling this contract set a dangerous precedent by interfering in the conduct of science. And the allegation here is that Morens got to work to restore the grant. And the question is, did Fauci know he did this? Well, Fauci has not only said he didn't know, he's disavowed Morens. He's pretended like he works in another building. I hardly ever talked to him. I barely knew the guy. We barely communicated. I don't know what he was up to. If he was doing that stuff, he wasn't doing it under my behest, right? But we have emails. Prosecutors say that they worked to counter, first they were working to counter the claim, and then what got interesting is Morens most famously said, guys, all the people he's talking to, Gerald Kush in particular, Peter Daszak, use your private Gmail accounts. Do not use your government accounts. So there's something, you want to come in and you want to do what's called a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request. The way that's done is 2 steps, and they're really blindingly obvious. They go to the government email account, and then they say, keyword. So it turns out that, and this is the kind of thing that David Morens did, that there's 2 ways to defeat FOIA. He even says that he consulted with a FOIA expert. There's an email saying he consulted with a FOIA expert to learn how to hide information. Actually, there's 3 that I'm thinking of too. The most obvious thing is after you've communicated, you could delete the correspondence, which you're not supposed to do with your government email. That's not legal. So they run it through the private account. That doesn't get searched. If a FOIA request is made, it doesn't include the private account. It includes the government account. And then if you delete the message cannot be found. And then if you start misspelling the words on purpose, or you invent a code that everybody nudge, nudge, wink understands so that you don't use the key terms. All of this was discussed. All of this is somehow or other revealed at one point or another in the messages that David Morens sends to people like Gerald Kush and Peter Daszak. And so the part of the reason that they're probably being listed as unnamed, their names are not actually being necessarily portrayed as co-conspirators, is that they would have awareness that this is how this was all working, because he was discussing it. He was saying it out loud in his emails. So this is the thing that's going to be very important as we go forward. This is an insular community. The Spillover Gang is very insular. They all know each other. They have a vested interest in keeping their thing going. And that's exactly the way this appears to have proceeded. So here's the bow on the top of all of it.
Yeah.
We are not being told the information. We're not getting it. It's being hidden from us. Let's look further. Let's look a bit more into that.
Yeah, purposefully hidden. Like we do not want people to know. This is a cover-up.
That's what it looks like.
Plain and simple.
That's what it looks like. Okay? And this is a guy who is right next to Fauci, although Fauci, as soon as this comes out, says, I don't know the man.
Let me ask that question again about whether this is an indictment of science. There is a reasonable question on that, but not just a blanket statement, right?
Yeah, so I think people are, the claim that's being made by Morens's allies or people in the science community is that this is political retaliation. I want to say 2 things about this. The first thing I want to say is the issue is not science versus politics. It is power that is protecting itself from truth.
Okay, there we go. Because this is huge, people. power protecting itself from truth.
Yeah, it's not science versus politics. So let's just concede something right up front. This is Gracearchy. Politics has a strong tendency to not be graceful. It is anti-grace, right?
Yep.
Harry Brown had this statement that he would say, where he'd say, the second that you make something a political question, that's what it becomes. A scientific question doesn't stay a scientific question, it becomes a political one. A moral question doesn't stay a moral question, becomes a political one. And it's decided by a variety of factors that have little to do with things like science and morality, right?
We can't blame Monday morning quarterback on this stuff, but this is an important, I was going to say it's an important steelman moment, but I think it took the team a while to get around to steelmanning this and calling it what it was, a cover-up.
Well, so, finally there's an administration that was interested in investigating this and considering a criminal prosecution. So Joe Biden leaves, and one of the things he does is he issues a blanket pardon to Anthony Fauci, dating back to the beginning of this research that had been authorized, coincidentally. So he basically says, you're never going to be prosecuted for any of the stuff that you've done here in this question. It's an open question whether or not that pardon sticks, whether that can be pierced. But the previous administration was acting as if to question this was to take the science and turn it into politics.
Right.
But that's not what's going on here.
That's not what's happening, and that's a tough distinction for people to make.
Okay, and it's important. I want to say something. It's going to be really hard for some people to swallow. In some cases, people are going to want to pretend that certain types of actions rise above that. They're just this. They're just, in this case, just science, right?
Right.
It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. That's a quote by Upton Sinclair, the original progressive muckraker. When you see scientists who are the top in their field, almost universally, they are tied into some kind of federal grant program. And the program that was actually being run out of NIAID was the largest, as a percentage, field that was government funded. Let me say that a different way so that the syntax there was a little bit weird. There's lots of fields of science, government's funding all kinds of it, but no field had a higher percentage of government funding involved than virology. And the guy that held those strings was Anthony Fauci. He's the center of that universe. And then there's people who move around inside it. And it's not just the case that they get research, but if their research breaks, they get a cut of the action. They get some of the royalties.
Yeah.
So they make a side income that is substantial in some cases. And we don't, to this day, they won't release that information. That information is treated as confidential. So
seriously, is this like blanket across the board?
Even Senate, I don't know, but Senate panels cannot get the NIAID information. Okay. So now, because everybody's in this, and let's assume that everybody in this is in this for the best of reasons, trying to do the best of work and believes everything that they're doing is vital, meaning the stakes have risen to existential. Okay, let's just look aside from the profit motive, which is very clearly there, right? This is their gravy train. But let's just look aside for that for just a second and just say they really believe this, regardless of which one of those motives it would be. They have a vested motive in making sure that it keeps going.
Oh, yeah.
And that's regardless of what truth arrives. If something scandalous occurs, the motive is to cover it up. The motive is to suppress it. And one of the most effective ways you can do it is saying, my opponents, the people exposing this, are anti-science.
This show is brought to you by the Zero Aggression Project. Zap newsletter subscribers get alerts when each episode is released. The Zap website is also the pathway by which you can contact us by email and support the show. This program operates thanks to tax-deductible Zap contributions, and we appreciate your support. So, zap the state, and have a nice day.
It doesn't have to be true, but as a scientist who says that, there's a certain sort of aura that goes with a scientist saying, they don't know what they're talking about. And it's hard to overcome, Jim, when the science is leading us down the path of COVID.
So I approach this from a libertarian lens, and I say, well, there's nothing special about scientists. They're human beings too, that put their pants on one leg at a time, or whatever the metaphor is. Okay. And so there's actually nothing less novel in politics than to say that you may believe that a whole array of programs should have their budget trimmed, but not your program. Your program is special. That's the program that not only it's so essential, it not only shouldn't be trimmed, its budget should be increased. You're not spending enough on the thing that I care about. Scandal arises in this situation, and that's where they immediately switch to worrying. Let me get to the second thing, because we're still talking about whether it is political retaliation against science.
Yes.
Politics was already in the room from the start. When you have a FOIA, it is there so the public can gain and the legislators can gain access to information. So anything that's being done to cover that up is a political act. It's also a criminal act. And I mean that in the normal sense that everybody understands those two words. So EcoHealth gets this grant, and then they redirect it to Wuhan, and this information comes back, and their contracts get canceled. This is the normal step that would be taken in any kind of situation, especially a political one, to make sure that damage control had been handled and to open the door for investigation. So when you get a guy like David Morens using private Gmail, deleting records, coordinating with others to hide communications about COVID origins, in an effort to restore funding for something that may have been potentially dangerous, because it was at least that at that hour. This is not an attack on science. This is about secrecy. This is about hiding from all of us what we had a right to know.
And it becomes obvious when you follow the money.
Yes. We are not children. We are not mere spectators in this system of governance. We are not mere misinformation spreaders. We're the people who paid for the research. We watched businesses and churches and everything else get closed. We watched all kinds of suffering. We watched people, and sometimes even in our own families, die or get very sick, or they're still, maybe, as you brought up earlier, dealing with the consequences. We have every right to have this information. And the fact that the government keeps, I've brought this up before, it strips off the veneer that we live in a representative democracy. You can't, if you don't have the fundamental knowledge, you can't be part of the wisdom of the crowd. You just can't. You can't do that. What are you going to base it on, the fact that they have a nice smile and you think their wife really wears nice dresses? Like, I don't know what we base the leadership on if we're not allowed to have access to this information. Shutting down access to information, which seems to be what the political class talks about doing all the time. They classify everything they can get their hands on. And here's a guy criminally classifying on his own. It means we cannot participate in this representative government experiment.
So not a lot of us are scientists at this level. How much information do we really need to be able to participate effectively? Like, now we're Monday morning quarterbacking this thing. So if they had told us XYZ back in 2023, we could have responded differently. They didn't. We responded how we did.
Well, there is something, we're not necessarily Monday morning quarterbacking, because one thing that is still the case is that gain of function research is still going on. And
Yes,
as recently
and
as
it
this
needs to.
month, we found out that they did bird viruses in Montana.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is not stopped, right? We don't know how it's being safeguarded. Information that the Senate, particularly Rand Paul, has attempted to get has been withheld from him repeatedly. So we're not necessarily Monday morning quarterbacking. We're talking about starting today, what should we be doing? But I do want to get to what we should do with the people involved in this. I do want to cover this before we go.
That is the one
That's going to be a
thing that we
major
need to
grace point before we finish.
So what is the role of the Spillover Gang here in this David Morens saga?
They provide a shield, a narrative that kind of hides what actually happened. And they seem to have agreed, as we laid out in detail back in March of 2023, they seem to have coordinated heavily and in private to do so. Now, integrity-wise, we have zero awareness of any other actors in this saga doing what Morens is accused of doing. That detail has not come yet. But they were trying to make it look like there was a scientific consensus, and they settled on something called the wet market explanation.
I remember this, yes.
And they moved from bats to pangolins to raccoon dogs. But no matter where they went, every one of these things had a common thread, and that was, it's not a lab. It didn't come from the lab, which was just on the other side of the city, the exact same city. It's a big, huge city, but it's just on the other side of it. This was a very small group, and they were consistently trying to blame animals for this, but every one of their theories had a big, bad hole in it, and that it was that animal culprit was too late to have committed the crime. Yeah. It could not have happened on the schedule that they said.
Yeah.
So if the indictment is right, which will be decided as time goes by, either by a plea bargain or by a jury, they're not sitting there in the background and merely chatting about science anymore. They're trying to figure out how to conceal communications, restore Dash-X EcoHealth Alliance grant, and counter the lab leak. They're working hard to counter the lab leak, not do science, counter the lab leak.
Yeah. As a theory, or actually practically on the ground. I don't think they couldn't keep it in once it had gotten out.
Right. So the Spillover Gang, with all these people who are the top scientists in their field, make it look respectable. And it was such that repeatedly up through about 2024, you were still seeing major media outlets put out stories as if this was the official story. And then there's this little conspiracy theory over here, when it turned out this was a little story and there was a vast amount of science to counter it. And the way you could tell who was on what side is who had skin in the game. And today, the damning thing I want to add on top of all of this is, because a lot of people in various scientific fields have spoken up about this prosecution and called it an attack on science, is that so many scientists in so many areas, not just NIAID, are involved in the government grant system, and they're worried that the spigot's going to get turned down, if not off. Well, it won't get turned off.
It has been for many of those agencies. Thank you to Doge and others.
I think that this is about institutions not acting on behalf of the people. And we had a right to know.
So we're adding to the whole mistrust of institutions with evidence.
Yes.
That there's a reason for
We're
that.
not adding, they are. It's their behavior. Like I said, this is a situation that was about the truth, not politics.
Yes, always has been. And we've been deprecated, by the way, for telling the truth about this topic before. So here we are, still fearless.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time for a Gracepoint.
Oh, good. This is my favorite part of the show.
Yeah, because you've all have heard all this whole thing now, been with us for half an hour or so, but we need to set it up so that the grace lands properly. So, Jim?
Grace requires truth before reconciliation. I didn't say instead of. I didn't say that grace is the only thing that matters. I said it requires truth before reconciliation. I don't want to just throw a man in a cage for 51 years and say, okay, we've done it. I want to say instead we need to get to the truth. And this is where we landed pretty much when we reviewed this issue in 2023. And I haven't heard anybody else say it, so it's time to say it again. I think 3 years is long enough to wait to get this point across.
Yes, sir.
We're not going to be soft on the wrongdoing here. That's not what we're talking about. The wrongdoing needs to be addressed firmly, and there needs to be a form of justice. But I do care about the people involved here and what they've done. And I understand the motives of someone being like, oh my gosh, is this going to cost us our jobs? Is this person's screw up going to, ruin the good work that we're doing? I understand where that motive comes from. I get it. I think this is something that is systemic to government funding things, that stuff like this would go on. But big corporations have problems too that aren't necessarily government funded. And when something goes wrong, this attempt to cover things up is not healthy for the institution. It's not healthy for the confidence and trust of people who interact with it.
Sure. What was the Challenger disaster? How long did it take Morton Thiokol to identify and resolve their issue with the solid rocket boosters. It was a
Correct.
huge thing. It took
Yes.
months. Many people were involved.
And
Anyway,
that whole thing set the program back. That was
It-
a
and it set the
damage.
program back.
It was damaging to the program.
yeah.
I think we should not be demanding vengeance in this matter. And I don't think
rolling
anything
heads aren't going to
about,
fix it. I agree with
I
you.
don't think justice should be about vengeance. I think a lot of people think about justice as an act of vengeance. I believe everybody, first of all, should receive due process, and that includes David Morens and the presumption of innocence. The information that's in the emails is pretty damning, but I still believe the case has to be proven against him. I would have preferred, though, that we didn't have to prove the case, that he would have just come forward and been completely honest. Now, he did testify in front of Congress and admit to some of the stuff that was going on here. I wish Anthony Fauci would admit his relationship with them. I wish the people involved that knew that this was going on, that were parties to some of these emails, would admit their role in all of this. I think it's important to establish at the end of the day a historical record of what actually happened so that we can actually learn the lesson from it. I'm far less concerned with what the punishment involves, but I do recognize that the judicial process, having that punishment mechanism in it, is an incentive to get people to talk. It's what's called a negative incentive, or you could call it the stick next to the carrot. It's the thing that says, listen, if you cooperate, we don't have to put you in the dock. And that leads to something called like a truth and reconciliation approach. A commission or an event where we are able to assemble a report saying we have now got everybody here and we've agreed to grant them some degree of reprieve. That could be negotiated, whether it should be full pardon or something shy of that. But we have decided that punishment's not the main thing we want. Truth is the main thing we want, so that we can learn the lessons of history here and not repeat the mistake and not have any debate over what it was that happened. We end debate because everybody comes forward in full-throated elocution. They all agree to say, I did this, I did that, I observed this, I observed that, and they put all the facts on the table. They're not allowed to hold any of them back, so that we can find out things like, did Fauci know? What did Collins know? What did Dashik ask for? Who helped restore the grant? Who shaped the natural origin commentary? Did they know that they were lying when they were telling it? Who else was involved in trying to mangle FOIA requests, right?
Yeah.
What other types of cover-ups have gone on? So here's where I end. This is my landing point. I want accountability without scapegoating. Let me say it again. I want accountability without scapegoating. And I want prosecution without bloodlust. I don't want people demanding people's hides. What I want is enough force to get to the point, self-defense type of force, to get to the point where we get to the truth. And when we got it, I want us to be satisfied with that. That is called truth before reconciliation. And it's grace that we can offer after confession and not instead of confession.
I like your point. I got to admit, though, man, it's hard because since, I don't know, the Cold War and maybe before, it's all been about cover-up and conspiracy and keeping the government's dirty deeds off the table and all of the rest of it. What do you see as the way to get from that mindset to the one we need today?
Okay, so just to be clear, I think this is the way things have been from time immemorial. I think this has been this way since the garden when he pointed at her and said, she made me do it, right? I think there's always been this attempt to squeeze out of accountability. It's ever present. What you do about it, number one, is you don't give the government this power. So the people, I'm on the side of the people who say this, I don't care how scientific this is. I'm not even sure I care how wonderful the alleged benefits are. I know from a whole career of observing and commentating on the state is that when the state takes something over, even when it seems like the thing that they're doing is the best thing they could do, it turns out that when they get their hands on it and it becomes a political thing instead of whatever it was supposed to be, it is ruined. It is damaged. It doesn't, at a minimum, it won't perform as well as it would if it were handled by people who loved and cared about the subject and were there because of their love and care for the subject. Science would be more scientific and it would be open to falsification. So that would be my second thing. Let's practice science again, because the very first thing you ask in science is what would disprove my view? and trying so hard to establish a narrative is not a scientific job. It's a PR job, but not a scientific one. It could be a political job, as it clearly was here, but not a scientific one. So we personally shouldn't accept those kind of explanations anymore. But last, I just simply want us to want to live in a world where we don't use force on each other. We talk about zero aggression here. We talk about human respect here. We talk about grace, which is going that one step further into trying to understand the person who's different from you, dare I say even your enemy, so that things can be different. I don't want people to be so fearful of punishment they don't confess, but I do think that if they don't want to confess, I do think we have the justice system here that gives us a way to bring truth before reconciliation.